thank you very much, everybody, for joining us here on this episode of Art World. We've got a great conversation ahead. I think there are so many different strands of the various, you know, conversations we've had leading up to this that I think are going to weave together about what is the the highly evolved artist career format of the future. Are artists startups? Where is the art ecosystem evolving, generally speaking, and how do you kind of attack all of the uncertainty and opportunity of this moment with intention and some kind of strategic perspective? And that's exactly what Salome is doing over at New Ink. So that's going to be a lot of fun. If you have questions, as always, please put them into the chat function at the bottom of the Zoom. We're going to gather them up, and I will call on as many of you as I can at the end to ask questions. So also, as always, questions that move the ball down the field are very much appreciated. Um, Without further ado, let's dive into the conversation. So thank you so much for coming on to Art World, Salome.
Thanks for having me. I shared this with you before, but you've had an incredible roster of guests, so I'm feel really honored to be included in the lineup.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, the great thing is that the lineup is accretive and I think of it as like a kind of a growing crescendo. So you're like coming in here at this point in this like, sequence of all these speakers is actually highly intentional. And it just means that everything has been leading up to this conversation that I'm really excited about. So to get started, can you just talk a little bit about the ideas behind New Ink? Where did it come from? What is its mission? And how is it positioned in this New York City landscape?
Yeah, totally. So New Ink is the New Museum's cultural incubator. We support creative practitioners working in a range of mediums, art, design, technology, architecture, science, things that aren't even named yet. I like to say that we're very much a home for the misfits, for people who don't fit into any one discipline. And in fact, the more hyphens you have in your practice, the lonelier it can feel. So New Ink is this community space where the multi hyphenate, the yet to be named, is really embraced. Um,
Hmm.
it it is, I think, truly an application of the New Museum's mission, which is to support new art and new ideas. Um, and it was founded at a time in 2014 where we're seeing a couple different things. We're seeing like a rise in co-working spaces, things like WeWorks, shared office spaces across New York City and across the country. We're also seeing um, in Silicon Valley in particular, like a rise in incubator programs and real support infrastructure for entrepreneurship. And at that time, our new museum director, Lisa Phillips, and then deputy director, Karen Wong, very geniusly, I think, came together, saw what was happening out in the world, um, and also saw that New York City graduates the highest number of creative people in the country. And, these people weren't really landing in job opportunities, and said, how can we apply some of these other things we're seeing in other sectors to the creative sector here in New York? And so New Ink was birthed.
That's so interesting what you say about all these multi-hyphenate creatives who are coming under the umbrella of New Ink, because it reminds me of when I was in Wesleyan studying poetry. We had a visiting lecturer who gave this talk called The Terrain of the Hyphen. And I've always been thinking about that kind of interdisciplinary like terrain of the hyphen. And that's actually a space that New Ink really resides because you are hyphenate like in terms of your very conception. You're a museum hyphen, art tech incubator. So what does it mean to be the world's first museum-led incubator? And why does a museum need an incubator? And if a museum needs an incubator, why is it natural that it be an art and technology incubator rather than being an incubator for like really ambitious paintings or people who are trying to, yeah, to reinvent the picture plane for the new millennium?
Yeah, I mean, those are all great questions. I think what it means to be the firstborn museum incubator is that this is the first program of its kind that comes with such robust offerings that invites creative people to work from inside the building and have access to museum staff. So, we have professional development programming that operates on an academic calendar. So we start in September, go through August, and we're instructing across a whole suite of things that include like really practical 101. How do I sustain my practice as a business? Things like strategic planning, business modeling, legal basics for artists, all the way to more like discursive conversations about kind of emerging trends we're seeing in art, design, and technology. So, for example, when there was a kind of big NFT boom. We tapped one of our alumni, Kevin McCoy, who has a long relationship with Rhizome. And at one of Rhizome's 7-on-7s, minted the first NFT, right? And so this is someone who's in our direct network as part of our community. And Kevin ran a 6-week blockchain's basic workshop for our community during this
Oh,
NFT boom, right? And so I think what we're able to leverage when we're based in a museum is like the incredible network of artists that have come through the new museum. And I guess to your question about why not um, incubate more traditional artists like painters or sculptors, I mean, we have some of those folks in our network for sure, but I think what the new museum does really well is like embraces all aspects of culture making, right? Like it's not just about what can hang on a wall or show in a gallery, but that kind of like sticky invisible stuff that keeps all of us together, right? Like the things that can happen in a nightclub, in a restaurant, down a runway, like that is all part
hmm.
of culture and should be embraced and brought into a museum.
So we here at Art World, as a startup, we look to incubators like Y Combinator for a lot of inspiration. I mean, we're like, Josh and I are kind of Y Combinator uh, fans to a really nerdy degree. And I wonder what kind of incubators out there that are kind of like Y Combinator do you look to for inspiration in terms of your approach, in terms of formats, in terms of various kinds of maybe metrics for success that you're aiming for?
Yeah, we definitely look at things like Y Combinator. We look at programs like Techstars or university-based programs like Fordham Foundry or even like the Barclays Accelerator, right? These are kind of like all pretty established programs for entrepreneurs. Um, but at the same time that I'm looking at those things, I'm also looking at residencies, fellowships, like postdoctorate opportunities. Um, and I'm trying to like find the in between of these kinds of programs, right? I think our secret sauce is that we very much want to share with creative people what the rules are, right? But we also want to like encourage them to break them and shape new
Huh.
ones. And so, um, it's a bit of like hybridizing different models for um, community driven programs or professional development programs.
So a little bit more Willy Wonka than Silicon Valley,
Oh,
maybe.
I love that. Yeah.
You.
I'll have to use that in a talk.
Um, okay, so when you're thinking about an applicant who is applying for new ink versus an applicant who is applying for something like Y Combinator, what are the differences? What is like the kind of the makeup of the new ink applicant, and what is it that are the hallmarks of a successful applicant? And then what goes into like the the actual process of getting into the incubator?
Yeah. I think a lot of programs like this look for and evaluate based on excellence, and I'm like less interested in that because it's so subjective and hard to it would be hard for me to determine like what is excellent versus like what my team member might think is excellent, creative excellence. Um, so I really look for growth mindset. Like it is when someone is applying to New Ink, are they showing vulnerability? Are they showing that there's room for improvement? Are they showing that there are things they're trying to learn? Um, that gets me excited because that opens a door for me to participate, right? It's saying like, join me in this thing that I'm really passionate about. Um, I'm also looking for people who are community minded. This is a big group of people. We support, anywhere from like 100 to 120 people each year. We have
Oh.
over 650 alumni. And so when you're coming to Newing, it's not just an individual experience. You're here with a bunch of amazing people. And so I think you get the most out of it when you're willing to extend yourself and meet new people. Our head of community always says that this is a place you make friends and it's a place where you make your colleagues for life. And it's true. I'm an alumni of the program. I was here the third year, and there are people that now 8 years later, I'm still in touch with. And actually, my meeting after this is with someone I was in the cohort with 8 years ago. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
And do you kind of expect people to have a business model when they come to apply to New Ink, or is that something that is kind of thought of as um, secondary to the idea and the growth mindset in terms of maybe building audience or getting you know building visibility?
I would say it's a bit secondary. I mean, these are things, strategic planning, business modeling, um, creating an entity. These are all things you don't really learn in a traditional MFA program. And so I don't expect people to come in, having thought about those things very deeply, but I do hope in their application that they signal that they want to achieve these things, right? Because then we really know how to support them.
And then, all right, so you have an applicant who gets into the program. Can you just very quickly talk about what are the amenities that you get when you're inside the program, and then what kind of support do you get after?
All right, there's so many, but I'll do it quickly. So when you apply to New Ink, you apply to sit on one of our 5 tracks, and these are areas of study or focus. And those tracks are guided by a mentor in residence whose job it is to find alignment between the projects there. So those tracks meet once a month. Um, you're also assigned a dedicated mentor to work with you one-on-one over the course of a year. You also have access to about 70 to 80 mentors who, office hour mentors, who you can sign up for quick 30-minute meetings with to, identify or work on something very targeted. Um, you also have access to special investor weeks, curator weeks, um, and then you have access to a really robust professional development curriculum. We intentionally over program. They're probably 4 to 8 hours worth of work. You can opt into each week. So a lot of material. All of that is recorded and kept on a member portal for you to access later. Community programs, you're given a museum membership, which gives you reciprocal membership to the rest of the institutions in New York City.
Oh,
Um, and then the shared workspace. I've mentioned we're in a temporary space right now, but when we move back to the museum, we'll have a fabrication lab, media lab. So it'll be just as much as space for materializing your ideas as it is about incubating them.
that sounds super cool. So in this Willy Wonka world that we're talking about, something is really special about New Ink, which is that, ideas of diversity and equity have been built into the heart of New Ink from the very beginning. And you can see this aspect of its mission reflected in the statistics around its graduates, where I think when it comes to some 650 plus alumni, 58% of them are Black, Indigenous, and of color, and 33% are women, which is actually quite striking when you compare it to what's happening in Silicon Valley, in the tech scene, more broadly, where I think, there's some study that 59% of executives in the top tech firms are white men, and and people of color are always underrepresented in leadership roles. So, where does this focus on inclusivity come from, and why is it important in the kind of in the competitive, landscape of creative tech?
Yeah, I think it's an initiative that New Ink took on even before my time, as having bringing on a director of community and someone who was thinking very intimately and intentionally about um, how to do outreach. And so, I wish there was like a more deep answer, but we're New York. We want to look like New York. And I think that's really at the heart of why those numbers look the way they do. Um, and and I think the great benefit of that is, there's just multiple perspectives on everyone's project. I think this kind of special thing about New Ink is you don't know who you're going to run into, what like lived experiences they bring with them, what professional experiences they bring with them. And this kind of catalytic thing happens when you bump into someone in a hallway and you get quick feedback or you're over a water cooler. And that quick conversation can be completely transformational for you and your work. I know I've
Mm.
experienced it here. And so I think that's why inclusivity is like so important to us because we want that kind of moment when you're, I don't know, it's a New York thing. You never know who's in the room and how a conversation can completely shape your work, you know?
I think that's such a great way of putting it, that it's like that Bell Labs, the long hallway where you're running into all these kinds of interdisciplinary people who are working on something that is, different, but maybe can inform what you're working on. And obviously, that's why everybody comes to New York, for this kind of extreme density, this polyphony of various like origins and perspectives. And I think the city has a pretty good track record of producing culture that seems to really change the world. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that, about why New York and its various kinds of just the ethos, and it's the diversity of the city is something that is powerful when it comes to innovating culture, and maybe in particular innovating culture tech at this moment where so much of the future of the arts is being invented today.
Mm, yeah. I'll never forget when I moved to New York. I'm originally from Las Vegas, and I moved here with like my cowboy boots on. I was like, I was a girl from the Southwest for sure. And um, it was a completely world-opening experience at 18 years old to be here and like learn that the world was so much bigger than I thought um, in my little desert town. And I learned so much so quickly, and I learned so much more by being out in New York than I did in my classrooms, right? Like going to museum panels, going to free days, gallery hopping, going out and going to concerts, going to nightclubs. These were all moments where I was seeing culture in practice, and it was completely inspiring. I mean, I was hooked, I was enthralled, and I think. Um, New Ink tries to capture that effect. It's hard to capture in a bottle, but I think being here, um, we're really good about building relationships with peer organizations and taking our program like on the road around New York City and making those connections for our members. And so I think that's like what makes the program successful is that we're not just trying to keep everything contained on our floor, but that we're like out in the world meeting people where they are too.
So when you're talking about like, the classroom of the nightclubs, and the way that like the city is so vibrant with all these various kinds of communities and culture, what are the kind of like what is like a litmus test for a project to be a new ink project, or an applicant to be a new ink project, in terms of being culture in a way that is relevant to what you're trying to do, rather than something that is like Spotify? Or would Spotify be a new ink project, whereas Airbnb would not be a new ink project?
That's a great question. I Something I look for in the applications are an awareness of an audience, of your audience. And so, have you shown a version of your project or business to someone? How have you received feedback around it? Um, and that when I see that kind of awareness, um, it signals to me that someone is feels accountable to a group of people, and I think that's good. I think that's they're clear on who they're making their work for.
Hmm.
Um, I think, that can be a whole game actually. We should make a New Ink game about big companies and if they would if they would have been New Ink members. I don't
Is
know. I
that
think Spotify maybe would have been. we probably would have accepted them. Yeah, but um,
Do people say, I'm going to create an Airbnb for artist studios? The
I mean,
Uber for paint delivery.
that's a board game we should make up. I mean, yeah, that's a side. Andrew, you and I will like sidebar about that. I like
Uh,
this as a card game.
I'm a big fan of yeah, venture capital board games. That sounds great.
There actually is
So
a game an artist made called Mouth to Faucet, that is exactly like this. That it's you pull a couple of cards and then you're forced on the spot to invent a business based on those parameters.
oh, that sounds so. I mean, my old friend Ben Davis is, in addition to being like the greatest art critic of his generation, as far as I'm concerned, is also probably the greatest like weird, eccentric, thinky art game creator out there. So that might be totally up his alley. Um, okay, so speaking of venture capital, and you know, the art market is down. Um, the market, the economy is weird overall, and everybody knows that New York is an amazing place to be a creative, except for when it comes to paying the rent, and the costs of living are just like skyrocketing. And you've said before that you believe that the days of the starving artist are over. And for that to be true, artists have to have a pathway to actually finding sustainable financial success. So, how does New Inc. coach its applicants on the business side of things? And what are some kinds of strategies that you espouse in terms of giving these kind of creative entrepreneurs the ability to pay their bills, to build sustainable businesses, and support themselves as they're trying to build these things?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, just to clarify, I don't think the days of starving artist are gone, but what I do think are gone are like the days of romanticizing that. I think we've seen since the pandemic, especially a heightened movement to ensure creative people are part of a larger um, organizing effort around labor to be included. We're seeing labor movement organizing and artists come closer and closer together with initiatives like arts.coop and the kind of programming New Economy Coalition has been doing. And so I'm really excited about that. Um, you know, in terms of the kind of coaching we offer, um, there's a lot of professional development around strategic planning that includes um, making sure that members know to diversify their income streams. I think we get a lot of people who come in and think the right answer is to start a nonprofit, for example, and um, and to get money from foundations. And then we have to have a conversation about like, well, that's actually is not the right fit for everyone. It's really difficult to get money from foundations, and maybe you don't want to put all your eggs in that basket. Um, and
Hmm.
I think we're seeing because we have one of our tracks is called cooperative studies, and it supports creative people who are modeling new forms of decision making and fundraising, um, and on that track, we're seeing a push towards circular economies, solidarity economies, and kind of micro investments. So investing in each other on smaller scales. So, the $100,000 grant would be great from a foundation, but maybe it's about getting a large number of people to give a smaller amount and reach that same number. And we're excited about platforms like, Yancey Strickler started Meta Label, and we're closely following that and thinking about ways we can integrate it into New Ink. But I think these kind of relying on a kind of community base of people who can consistently give at a smaller amount might be more sustainable for some projects, right? Than thinking
Hmm.
you need to follow the model of like nonprofit organization and get the giant grants from from large foundations.
And what about the venture capital pathway? You know, I I know that there are some artists who have made it, really big in the crypto, in the NFT world, who have taken on venture capital in order to scale their operations. Um, and obviously, there are businesses that have been put through the new ink pipeline that I'm sure have taken venture capital. But what is your advice on how artists in your program deal with the concept of venture capital, and how what is your advice for people who are starting creative companies on dealing with venture capital?
Yeah, we have a great partner in a collective of VC investors called Venture Mentoring Team, and I'll say the thing that I've heard them say that every funding relationship is an interpersonal relationship. So um, you just anyone you're taking money from, make sure that this is someone that feels like a true partner, right, and can really help you propel um, to whatever next scale you're trying to reach. I think that I think VC funding is fine. I just think that artists should do their homework, right? Like do your due diligence. And there are so many more there are newer models for how you can receive that funding. And so just making sure that you're seeking legal counsel, right? And like evaluating what makes the most sense for you and your business or studio. Um, I think it's this is a network um, of people who are not resourced, right? We don't have much like federal, state, city funding that comes to the arts, and so we are really reliant on individual donors or foundations. And so it's really easy, I think, for artists to see dollar signs and get excited, but really just slow down and make sure that you're choosing a model that really makes sense for you long term. And so for, the people in our program, we have lawyers on hand that they can consult through office hour appointments and just review contracts and make sure that the relationships that they're setting in place make sense.
You know, last week on the show, we had Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst from Spawning. And, obviously, they are brilliant artists who have shown in the Whitney Biennale, Whitney Biennial. Um, but they also are basically startup entrepreneurs, and Spawning is their company, but it's also kind of their studio. There's a little bit of slippage between their creative work and their entrepreneurial work in this like AI field. And it strikes me, that there are more and more artists who are, especially ones who are working with AI, who are starting companies. Um, for instance, yeah, Mario Klingemann with Bato, and Ian Chang has a new AI company that he's starting. I wonder, like, does this formulation of the artist studio as startup seem like it's a well adapted kind of format for this multiple revenue stream, future of creative entrepreneurs that you're envisioning, or is that something that's kind of like almost like a fork from the traditional gallery collaborating artist model?
I think it's really smart. I think it feels I mean, the artists that you've named, it just feels so proactive. I mean, these people were already great seers, right? In their practice, they were identifying things so like well before others in our field, before things were becoming mainstream conversation. And so it makes sense that they would start companies or entities to kind of protect those ideas, right?
Hmm.
Um, and really start to own them. So um, I think it's smart for any artist to do that. Um, I would love to see more people doing it together. Like if um, I don't think every artist needs to start their own business, but I'm really interested, as you know, in groups of people coming together and starting things. So
There used to be the age of the collective, and that was I mean, I remember back to like, the Bruce High Quality Foundation had a real kind of certain kind of energy and thing going on. Um, and gelatin, for instance, but you don't hear that much about those kinds of collectives so much anymore, except maybe, and I think this is a good segue with the case of Mischief, who is one of your kind of like fabled alumni. Can you talk a little bit about like the really big success stories of New Ink, and maybe start with Mischief. How did Mischief come through your incubator? How did you arm them with the tools that they needed in order to, to scale and realize their vision? And how is what they're doing today as this kind of like, global enterprise of culture hacking, um, artistic interventions like the Smurf boots, like the Jesus sneakers with Little Nas X, or I'm sorry, the Satan sneakers with Little Nas X. Like, uh, can you talk a little bit about their story in the context of New Ink?
Yeah, totally. They were recruited through Karen Wong, who I think did a studio visit or something with them at when they were students at RISD. And so when they applied as a company, a startup called Hello Velocity that was um like a full 360 like creative studio that would do everything from design to research to speculative work. And I think one of the projects they applied with was something called Bite Labs, where as a speculative alternative meat company that grew meat in a lab from celebrity tissue samples. And so the idea was you could get so close to a celebrity you love, you could eat their flesh, and totally wild out there, kind of gross, but also were these like really highly critical design projects, right? Um and of course they've completely ballooned as Mischief. I think they're now like 20 plus
Hmm.
people, yeah, 20 plus person team based in New York, multi-millions of dollars in investment, um, huge celebrity collaborations. Um, I still want the Spike Lee Tims that they've made. But
Wow.
yeah, all of their projects are super sharp, timely, and examine our relationship to hyperconsumerism.
Sounds like Army Hammer would be a good investor or collaborator.
Invite Labs, yeah.
Um, but so tell me about what of their strategy, and clearly they're, a huge success. What do you think? What of their strategy um, is, you know, a trademark or shows a signature of New Ink's kind of approach?
Mm, I think that it's their voice. It's that they're so clear on their values and vision of a world. They're not afraid to be critical, and that being critical doesn't mean you can't find success, right? That a business isn't sustainable. You can still push forward a vision of a world you want, um, and also make money. And I think that is like a huge through line in all of the New Ink projects. They're all social impact driven. They're not afraid to make noise. They're not afraid to be a bit punk, and um, and they'll find a business plan that supports them being punk.
Super cool. Okay, so another kind of celebrity graduate of the New Ink program is Stephanie Dinkins, who is famous for her Bina 48 robot and is just like, this huge rising star, the winner of the Guggenheim LG Award or the LG Guggenheim Award. She was named one of Time's 100 most influential people in AI. What was her journey through New Ink like? And again, same question is like, how does her approach today kind of reflect the fingerprint in some way of New Ink?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, Stephanie Dinkins is a star. I have so much love for her as like a friend and my neighbor too. Um,
Amazing.
So Stephanie came into the program when she was having these conversations with Bina 48, which is a humanoid robot that presents as a Black woman. And the development team behind Bina did not reflect who she was. So Stephanie was interested in having conversations with Bina about her racial identity, her gender identity, and she wanted to see if how the developers programmed her, you know, like really reflected in those conversations. And a series of videos came out afterwards that were really interesting. And at New Inc., Stephanie participated in a partnership we had with Nokia Bell Labs, where we revived the Experiments in Art Technology program. And so a select number of artists were able to work with Nokia developers and programmers to advance projects. And then there was a kind of culminating exhibition 1 year at the New Museum and 1 year at Mana Contemporary in Jersey. So Stephanie was part of that. And I think that something that's continued in her practice is, and maybe was sparked at New Inc., was that she's always been really good about making time to have conversations with the developers behind the tools she uses, right? She like and really embraces that, I think, as part of her process, that how she understands technology. She wants the developers to understand how she is reading and using the tools that they're making, which I think is really special to slow down and invite that into your process.
And here's a question from a little bit of naivete. Does she work with the gallery today?
I don't think Stephanie is represented by a gallery.
Yeah, I was just checking. I know Mischief works with Periton,
Periton, yeah.
but I'm not sure if she works with the gallery. And I wonder, like, in this kind of paradigm that you're equipping people to operate in, you know, where multiple revenue streams, you know, kind of working in this kind of startup or startup adjacent kind of mode. How are you seeing the artist relationship with gallery, or how do you think the relationship that artists have with galleries should evolve? What are some things that maybe could be improved or changed there? Um, yeah, how do you look at that relationship?
Yeah, there are few artists in our program who are represented by galleries. And I think the thing that I hear most frequently is that galleries really struggle to cultivate a collector base for them. Um,
Hmm.
I think it's growing, but I think that I think that it's been hard for some of the people in our program to, because their work is so experimental, it's so new, that it takes a couple of years before someone like really understands its place in like a historical context and then is like willing to make the purchase. But like when something's like fresh out the studio, I think it's hard for people to embrace it and figure out what it is. I mean, that doesn't apply, I think, to institutions. I think institutions, you know, when something is in an exhibition, maybe they're more willing to collect it. But in terms of like individual collectors, I hear from members that that's difficult.
Hmm. So we talked about two alumni. Um, who would you point to as maybe a third that you think is representative of a kind of like, you know, innovative approach to the art career that that maybe people haven't heard of, or maybe that they don't know is a new Inc. Graduate?
Mm, uh, a third. I'm like, this is always my challenge when people ask
Right.
me about alumni. I'm like, can I just tell you about all 600 of them? Um,
How about at random, like beginning with a letter that is like a vowel, or just at
well,
random?
I'll tell you someone I was talking about this morning because there was an prospective applicant who was asking me about them. The so when they were at New Inc., they were called Movers and Shakers, but they're now called Kinfolk Foundation, and they're started as a for-profit business, now converted into a 501(c)(3). But they're an organization that um, is very much invested in a contemporary conversation we're having about monuments and who we decide to celebrate in public space. And so using augmented reality, they overlay historical figures we should maybe instead be celebrating on existing physical monuments in New York City. And so when they were at New Inc., they received a $500,000 Verizon small business grant, which was, I think, you know, really important seed capital for them to get started. And they kind of brokered partnerships with Netflix. Netflix had a multi-part documentary called Amend. So um, Kinfolk did a series of augmented reality sculptures with them. Um, they also were featured in MoMA had an architecture show called I think it was called New York New Publics, and their AR monuments were featured in that show. And then when they left New Ink, they received a like $1.8 million grant from the Mellon Foundation to
Wow.
further develop this. This is when they became a nonprofit. They started to take the project national, and they've now commissioned pretty significant AR sculptures from incredible artists, people like Tourmaline, Juan Getchimutu, Hank Willis Thomas, and many others. So, I mean, they're really, I think, for me, like a standout in terms of alumni because they came into the program, were sure about what kind of entity they wanted to be through mentor conversations, changed to a nonprofit, which made sense for them, and then really had a strong business plan and were able to seek funding.
Okay, so let's dissect that a little bit more because they sound like they're extraordinarily successful. And is that, do you think, a product of the clarity of their vision, of maybe like the relevance and timeliness of their vision, or was there something about the makeup of the team and the way that they approached it that that maybe fused with that strength of the concept to make it really successful? Like, was there like grit? Was there was there like a kind of Brian Chesky like one-on-one product iteration out in the field, or how do you explain that amount of success?
I mean, absolutely grit and determination and consistency. They really took advantage of every feature of New Ink. They built relationships. Those relationships extend beyond the year, or they were here for 2 years, but you know, they continue to cultivate those relationships, deepen them. Once you meet someone who opens a door for you, then that person brings you to someone else who can open a door for you, and it continues. But I think that they were really determined to meet people, and also they were really good about capturing their story. They were really good at workshopping the narrative of how they publicly present what they do, um, which takes time, and iteration.
Is there maybe one anecdote or story that you remember that kind of like encapsulates that grit or like this kind of this storytelling focus that they had?
I think that they are really good about rehearsing for a presentation they're about to have, which to me is like it means that they're taking things and it's they're taking things seriously. And so when I was before New Ink, I worked at the Ford Foundation, and I remember visiting New Ink with my team, and um, movers and shakers presented for us, and you could just tell that this is something that they had been working on for us. This was a presentation. This wasn't something they just like pulled up and they do every week. This was something catered to us. And when someone presents like that, it really sings. You can tell that they studied your work too, and they're here to meet the moment.
Huh. That sounds like that is just very widely applicable advice, but uh, okay, so you have been at New Ink for some time now, and you have been making big changes. And I think that a lot of the work that has been done at New Ink has been behind closed doors, has really been mainly for the benefit of the people who are in the program. And you have been working to make it much more public and kind of open up those doors. Can you talk a little bit about those efforts? And why you think it's important, and why do you think it's interesting to the public to understand what's going on in the inner workings of New Ink?
Yeah, I think for a good chunk of New Ink's history, the program was like read as a secret community of people toiling away in the corners of the museum, inventing the future. And um, I like the cultish aspect of New Ink, but I think it was important for people to see what was happening because the work here is really fantastic. I mean that like like full spirit, full heart. Like I am so excited to be here every day with the members. And I wanted to brag about them. I mean, it was as simple as that. Like I just needed other people to see what I was seeing every day. And so we really ramped up public programming 3 years, and that included expanding our what was a 1 day program called Demo Day. We expanded into a 3 day festival that really celebrates the work of the New Ink members, and it takes place each June. And in addition to the New Ink members, we bring in external speakers who can give further color, context to the kinds of questions and ideas we're incubating in the program. And in true festival spirit, there are parties and dinners and performances. So it feels very festive. And then there's also a 30 to 40 person exhibition. So you can really see, like, you can go see someone speak on stage and then take a little walk and see their work applied and interact with it. So this takes place this year, June 4th through the 6th. If you're in town, would love to have you there. It's a free program and a lot of fun. It's, long days, but really fun.
And is there some kind of like exhibition output at the new museum that results from all of this kind of this ferment?
Not yet because I started this um, when we were already in our temporary space. So the museum was closed for construction. But maybe when we
Ooh,
return back, yeah.
very, very interesting. Okay, well, last question before we turn things over to the audience. But you, as you mentioned, you were a an incubatee at New Ink, and you are an artist yourself. I mean, in addition to having this really, extraordinary kind of career track record, you mentioned, the Ford Foundation. Um, can you talk a little bit about how your experience at New Ink has changed the way you think of your own approach to the artist career, to your artist career, and maybe what are some things that you do differently now than you did before your really deep engagement with New Ink?
Yeah. So when I was here, I was with a group of friends and we were starting a nonprofit organization called Power Plant, which was, we call it a digital art collaboratory. We work with mid-career digital artists to teach the next generation of artists, their tools, processes. So everything from like Adobe Creative Suite to working with generative AI. And um, that nonprofit still exists and has continued without me. There's a whole new like youth leadership council. So, it's proof that New Ink works. We were able to set up something sustainable and I'm like feet, yards, miles away from it and it's still going. Um, um, things that I would do. Wait, repeat your question again. Things I would do differently.
Yeah, what has it changed about the way you approach things? What do you do differently now as a result of your experience at New Ink?
Mm, I think I would have I was so focused on building horizontally with the members that I wish I took a bit more time to build with the mentors in our program because we have over 150 incredible people who come from all corners of the creative industry. Um, and I wish I took some more time to think about how I could collaborate with them. It's unreal now. I mean, I'm meeting many of them again with my new hat on, but yeah, it's so special that we have access to some of these people. They're curators from top institutions, they're investors, funders at various philanthropies. Yeah, just like there's a lot of brain power in the program.
Well, speaking of brain power, let's turn things over to our brilliant audience members. So I'm going to call on Louise Lasselle. Would you like to ask your question?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Hi,
perfectly.
sorry, there's some background music. I was wondering, how do you guys work with galleries during the program, and like how much of it is like arts and curators and galleries focused and how much is business plan focused and like venture capitalist, because my practice really falls right in between the two of like experimental experience art and like light art and very gallery focused. So if you could talk a bit about that.
Yeah. So when members apply to the program and are accepted, they're asked to submit a member enrollment form that asks all the kinds of learning you're hoping to do. And so each year is really tailored to the people who are in the program. And so, it varies year to year how much business, how much art we go. But something that we do every year is a curators week where we invite both gallerists and curators from all over the country to do virtual studio appointments with our members. And, you know, in those meetings, I've seen people continue their relationships outside of New Ink. Some people have had shows based on those meetings. Some people have been included in short lists for various opportunities. Um, so it totally depends on the makeup of the cohort that year, but you will have access to galleries for sure.
Great question. Um, okay, well, here's another question that is very, I think, tactical and clear, which is how can we connect with Salome? How is
Yeah. Well, come to New Ink programs. We do many of them. You can come see me in person. I'm quite chatty in person. Um, yeah, I'm not on LinkedIn. I'm such a LinkedIn hater. I'm sorry, but
why? Why are you LinkedIn a hater? Just out of curiosity.
no, it's like all social media. I've slowly cut all the notifications out of my life. I know. Um, but I am on Instagram. That's like the last social media platform I'm on. Okay, yeah, thank you, Natalie.
For those listening to the podcast version, Natalie has commented, LinkedIn haters unite, LOL. Um, okay, you know what? I have one more question. And I think this is maybe a very topical question. And everybody probably knows about the protest that has met this Christie's AI auction that is in progress. And there is, we had Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst on the program last week to talk about their approach to, creating a responsible image generating model that is trained entirely on public domain imagery because they feel that there is a future where work that is made on copywritten imagery may have some kind of, legal jeopardy. And now we see this reaction to the Christie's auction where people are basically, kind of arguing that AI is theft to a degree and that a it's not it's not a moral or ethical kind of approach to an auction. So in the context of this kind of debate, how are you in New Ink kind of mentoring your applicants who are working with AI? Because I'm sure that there are probably a lot.
Yeah, there are many. We're just at the beginning, as a team thinking about what an AI policy, and I'm putting this in quotes because I don't even think that's like the language I want to use, but a kind of set of agreements we can uh, adhere to as a community of people, and also as a staff. I'd like to do this collaboratively. I'd like to consult artists, but I think that we do need some um, kind of manifesto or guidelines or philosophy that we'll stick to, because right now it does feel a little bit wild, wild west, and we don't have kind of core language that we're all using. So that to me feels like step one. Um, and then this next year, um, we will have a set of, I think, workshops that specifically think about AI and IP and copyright. And then I'm hoping I actually just pinged Holly and Matt to join us for demo this year. So I have my fingers crossed that they'll be there and we can talk about this a bit more.
It does feel very messy and unsettled, particularly in the art field. because the art field, unfortunately, just doesn't have very strong institutions when it comes to collective projects. There's the AAMD, there's the APAA, there are all these things, but they're fairly small and they're not all that powerful as opposed to something like SAG-AFTRA, which was very effective, at least in kind of coming to the table with some strength in the negotiations in Hollywood. So yeah, I just wonder, as one last note, you know, what do you think needs to be built in the art space to make these kinds of 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 um, of alignment issues of figuring out, how do you reorganize the art ecosystem and its basic kinds of components in a way that is responsible, ethical, and fair going forward? That's a big question, but what do you think? What do you think needs to be built?
Yeah, I think as cultural people who work in cultural institutions, we have a responsibility to have these conversations, and host programming around it in ways that feel nuanced and specific. I can't tell you how many shows we probably all went to 10, 15 years ago that were like the internet show that the museum put on and wasn't like specific at all. And you're like, what did I learn in that? Okay, yeah, we're all on the internet. Yeah, we need something that goes deeper this time around, right? It can't just be AI. AI is embedded in everything we do, from a simple Google search to, how your you complete text in iMessages, right? Like it's in everything. And so I think we just need to be specific and clear on how, when we say AI, what do we mean? And bring people who are unlikely to be in conversation into a room together, so that work of constant translation is happening. Even just what Natalie put in the chat about how many of the artists in the auction um, are not using mainstream language learning models. I don't think that's a lot of people know. I don't think people
Hmm.
are clear on like what the process of making even really all entails, and I think that's our responsibility as programmers to make visible to people.
Super interesting. I feel, yeah, that's a big conversation. I definitely want to keep focusing on that. And actually, Stephanie Dinkins is going to come on the show in a couple of weeks, and she's a great person to talk to about it because she uses a kind of a homebrew LLM of her own devising, and that is a completely new artistic approach compared to what people were doing, let's say, a decade ago. It's a really interesting time, but thank you so much, Salome. This has been really, really fascinating.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you all, live audience, for joining and asking great questions.
Super fun. Okay, thanks everybody. See you next week. We're going to have Tom Emmerich from Meta on the show to talk about the metaverse. So that should be fun. Thank you. See you next week.